What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. And on today's video, as you can see, we are looking at Altra's first foray into carbon plated super shoe territory. We're looking at the Vanish Carbon. And guys, full disclosure, Altra was kind enough to send me this shoe for the purpose of review. I did not have to buy this shoe, however, Altra is not paying me. And of course, they are not going to see this review before you do. Now, prior to making this review, I have run pretty much every type of run in this shoe. I've gone long and easy, I've run tempo, I've run intervals. And you might be thinking to yourself, Matt, why would you go for a long, easy run in this shoe? Clearly, it's made for going fast. And I would agree with you. But what I found was actually a pretty compelling reason if you were looking at buying this shoe. Or I should say, it's another compelling reason if you were looking at buying the Vanish Carbon. But let's get started with price, because if you are interested in buying this shoe, you're probably going to need to know the price first. Here in the US, the Altra Vanish Carbon brings in at $240. In the UK, it's £220, and in the rest of Europe, it is €250. So definitely not cheap, but definitely right in line with the competition as far as carbon plated super shoes. And I would argue, and I'm going to present this argument, that I would say that this shoe could actually be better for more people, a wider range of runners than other super shoes out there. But we will get into that. Now, if you haven't run in an Altra shoe, the things that makes Altra different from most other running shoes can primarily be boiled down into two categories. The first is that all Altra shoes are zero drop, or as Altra calls it, balanced cushioning. And this simply means that we have the same amount of stack height in the forefoot as we do in the heel. And in the case of the Vanish Carbon, we have 33 millimeters throughout. The other thing that makes Altra different from most other running shoes is their foot shape design. And basically, Altra shoes are a little wider in the forefoot, and this is to give your feet a little room to splay out. Now, there is a little bit of difference with the Vanish Carbon, and that is that Altra is using their slim foot shape design. And basically, it means that the foot shape is just a little slimmer, which I realized was totally given away in the name. Although you can still see the foot shape, it certainly isn't overdone. And just from my own experience and my own foot shape, I think this is a direction that Altra could be heading for a lot of their shoes, only because this slim toe box fit me extremely well. My feet still had plenty of room to splay out, to breathe. I didn't feel constricted at all. And yet I also didn't feel like I had too much room. And while we are talking about room and too much room, I found that the Altra Vanish Carbon to fit true to size. So let's talk about weight. And the Vanish Carbon tips the scale at 7.65 ounces or 217 grams for a men's size 9. However, in my size, a US men's size 13, UK size 12, it tips the scale at 9.8 ounces or 279 grams. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with that. It's definitely not the lightest shoe that I have, but as I sit here, it feels extremely light in my hand, and it feels really light on my foot. I did put this back on the scale after I went out for a 14-mile run. Now remember, results may vary. I live in Florida, it is the summertime, so I'm probably sweating more than a lot of people. But after 14 miles of running in the Vanish Carbon, this shoe tipped the scale at 10.7 ounces or 302 grams. That's a 23-gram increase or 7.9% weight gain. And perhaps you think, that's a lot of weight. My friends, it's not. Go back and look at some of my other videos of some daily trainers when they are really heavily padded, and they all put on well over 10% of weight. So a 7.9% weight gain on a really hot, muggy morning after running 2 hours is actually pretty impressive. Okay, just like all my shoe reviews, we are going to start at the top. We're going to work our way down. And I've got quite a bit to say about the top half of the shoe. So let's start off with this heel collar right here. And this heel collar is basically nothing. It's a very thin piece of material. It's kind of like a rubberized engineered mesh, almost like a neoprene material on the inside. And right around here, it doesn't actually touch the bottom of my heel or the side of my ankle, but that's really okay. I've had other shoes that fit the same way, and I don't really have any ill effects from it. We do have little bumpers here on the back, right on the inside of the heel counter, and those contribute to keeping that heel locked in place. Now this heel counter, this is a race shoe. See this? This is loosey-goosey, and that's pretty much the style of the entire upper. It is very thin, it's very loose, it's very lightweight. Now, I do have to say that I don't really experience heel slip in any shoes. That's just not a problem that I find. So I recognize that me telling you that I didn't have any heel slip in this shoe doesn't really count for much, because I really don't have heel slip in any shoe. But still, I'll say it, my heel did have a good lockdown. Now, we've already mentioned this rubberized kind of engineered mesh towards the back. We can see the color differential. Obviously, the black is where it turns into the rubberized material. We also have some venting here on the sides, and maybe if I hold it up, you can kind of see through it. There's venting right there, which just lets a little more airflow in. But really, the upper, at least the engineered mesh part of this upper right around here, is extremely breathable. And it's extremely breathable because it is extremely minimal, and it is just full of these ventilation holes. To say it's minimal is an understatement. And you can kind of see it kind of collapsing in on itself here on the front, but you'll notice that it isn't collapsing in on itself in the middle. And this is actually a pretty good design, because by having such a light upper, we're saving weight. We've got that slim foot-shaped toe box, so we don't have an excess of material wrapping around our foot. But on the inside. There are some bands on the inside that wrap around the midfoot. And ultimately they are very thin little, almost like very thin neoprene bands that start at the bottom of the outsole and they come up to the eyelet chain. And that's just giving a little support for that midfoot area. And that support is noticeable, or at least I should say it's not noticeable, but the reason I bring it up is because this upper is so light and so wispy that you would think that your foot would be sliding all around in the shoe. And it's not, because these midfoot bands keep your foot locked into place. Okay, let's move on to the tongue. Now the tongue has received a lot of criticism, and maybe that is rightly so. Listen, the shoes are going to fit different for all of us. And I want to sit here in front of you and tell you that I didn't really have an issue with the tongue once the shoe was on my foot. Now saying once the shoe is on my foot is a pretty big caveat, because getting the shoe on is about 10 times more difficult than most other shoes. And I'm not exaggerating by saying 10 times more difficult. It's almost like this rubberized engineered mesh around the back just doesn't stretch at all. And unless you undo your laces all the way down and then pull the tongue out, I found I was really trying to wrestle my foot into the shoe. Now, don't look too deeply into that. I never missed a run. I never shortened a run because I spent so much time putting the shoe on. It's nothing like that. It's just, if you're like me, if you're a little lazy and you don't undo your shoelaces all the way, it might be a bit of a tight fit to get your foot in. But once your foot is in, it's a beautiful fit if you get the tongue right. Now the tongue is not gusseted. It is a very thin racing style tongue, and it's difficult to show you here on camera in this position, but the tongue does wrap around the sides. And right here on the top of the tongue we have very minimal padding to stop those laces from biting into the top of your foot, and then as the tongue moves down it turns more into the engineered mesh with all the ventilation holes. But on the underside of the tongue, the part of the tongue that is touching the top of your foot, around the edges we have glued neoprene strips. Now I don't know if they're neoprene, it's kind of like a rubberized material, but neoprene is what I think of when I see it. And those neoprene strips on the edges of the tongue are to give the tongue a little bit of grip on your socks when your foot is in the shoe, which on paper is pretty genius. And when the tongue is positioned well, it works exactly as it should. I didn't have any tongue movement, the laces didn't bite into the top of my foot, and the tongue stayed in place. However, remember I was saying how difficult it was to put the shoe on? Sometimes when you put your foot into the shoe, because the tongue is so thin, sometimes the sides of the tongue kind of wrap around and in on itself. I then have to stick my finger in between the tongue and my foot and kind of straighten it out to make sure the tongue is lying flat against my foot. So all that to say, spend an extra 30 seconds on making sure your foot is correctly in the shoe and the tongue isn't bunched up at all. And if the tongue is laying flat against your foot, as it is designed to do, you will be able to very easily tighten the laces, get a good lockdown, and go for a run in an extremely comfortable shoe. Now, as far as the laces go, I didn't have any problem with the laces. My first impression was that the laces were a little short. I double knotted them. I didn't have much left over, but that is really nothing to complain about. The laces never came undone while I was running, and really that is the one job that laces are supposed to do. Coming down to the midsole, Ultra is using their Go Pro midsole. It is a supercritical TPU based foam, and it is the most responsive and most energy efficient midsole foam in Ultra's lineup. And my friends, this midsole feels pretty cush underfoot. It is a treat to run in. And of course, because of my height, maybe because of my weight, I do enjoy a thicker stack height. I really like that cushion. It makes for a much more comfortable run for me. The 33 millimeters of stack height throughout give a very comfortable ride. All in all, the Go Pro midsole is a dream. I don't know if it's my favorite thing about this shoe. It could very well be. But ultimately, I think the shoe is more than the sum of its parts. So let's keep going. Because up until now, we haven't mentioned the carbon fiber plate. And in the Vanish Carbon, Ultra is using a Carbotex half plate, which means the plate is only in the forefoot of the shoe. It probably comes down to about there, and it is a 3-pronged plate, which is right in line with Ultra's design. We can see the outsole on these shoes kind of follow the metatarsals of your foot, and the same thing with the Carbotex half plate. The 3 prongs kind of follow your metatarsals if we had 3 toes. And that plate design provides asymmetrical flexing, which is actually a phenomenal idea because it allows the shoe to work for so many more people. Let's say you're someone that pronates a little too much, or let's say you're someone that supinates a little too much, you're still going to be getting the benefits of the carbon fiber plate flexing and then pushing you forward. It's actually a very good design to make carbon plated shoes work for everyone. And if we look at the outsole, Ultra is using a hardened EVA for the outsole. It's not rubber, it's a foam. And I think perhaps they did this to save weight, but obviously a hardened EVA, a hardened foam, is not going to be resilient as pretty much any kind of rubber. And for me, this is the one thing that I would like to see changed on future iterations of this shoe, and I'd like it to be a little more resilient. Because before making this review, I've run about 50k in this shoe, and I'm already seeing substantial wear across my midfoot, a little bit here on my lateral edge of my heel, but because this is a zero drop shoe, it does kind of force me to land more on my forefoot and midfoot, and that is where I'm seeing most of the wear. And after 50K, it's not something I like to see, at least not to this extent. And I did see some reports out there that Altra is claiming about 150 miles for this shoe, which, as we know, it is a race shoe. We know that race shoes don't last as long as daily trainers, so perhaps that is to be expected. But what we have seen over the last couple years is super shoes being built to last a little longer. But to be honest, if you are using this shoe for racing, perhaps 150 miles is enough. The performance and the comfort of the shoe make the shoe well worth the $240, 220 pound price tag, in my opinion. Okay, remember I said that my first run, I opened the box, I took them out, I ran 14 miles, a little over 14 miles, and how that was a good indicator of something? Well, it was a good indicator that this shoe is good for everyone. And that's because I went out and I ran a very easy run. Now, usually these super shoes, they are made that they excel when they run fast. And I do have to say that the Vanish Carbon does excel when you pick up the pace. In fact, I would say that it excels more so than a lot of other carbon plated shoes that I've used as far as the feeling of being pushed forward. But what surprised me most was how comfortable this shoe was at slower paces. So perhaps you're someone that thinks, oh, you know, I don't run fast enough to make a carbon plated shoe worth it. And there have been studies out there that show that you have to run at a certain pace in order to get the full benefits of the carbon plates in certain shoes. The Vanish Carbon feels remarkably good at every speed that I use it for. The rocker starts 65% forward from the heel. And if you look at the shoe, if you look at the midsole, you can actually see the fulcrum. We can see where the top Ego Pro and the lower level of Ego Pro kind of come together, where they're sandwiched and the plate is sandwiched in between. And you can see how the Ego Pro starts higher in the back and then it comes down and it drops down, so there is not as much foam below the carbon plate as there is above it. So with such an early rocker design, it gives the shoe that feeling of propulsion almost. Or I shouldn't really say propulsion, as much as it's making each stride feel a lot easier than it ordinarily would. So imagine if your rocker started later in your shoe, like it does in a lot of shoes. You really have to be running fast and get up on your toes before you roll up and actually take advantage of that plate loaded to push you forward. With the Vanish Carbon, because it starts at 65% from the heel, it's early enough that you are benefiting from the carbon plate at much lower speeds. And really, that's what makes this shoe so good for everyone. And if you are already a fan of Ultras, I think this shoe is a no-brainer. This shoe is ridiculously comfortable. It moves you along very efficiently at pretty much any speed. So you don't have to feel bad if you're not keeping up with the front of the pack at your marathon or your half marathon. Because of how quickly the outsole is wearing down, I know me, I'm gonna be a little more precious with it. I'm probably not gonna take this shoe out for anything more than my very fast efforts. But I guess that's okay. That is what the shoe was made for. So guys, I wanna hear what you think. Have you seen the Vanish Carbon and thought, ooh, that looks like something I'd like to try? Let me know in the comments. And if it is something that you'd like to try and you have any questions about it, about the ride, about the fit, go ahead and drop a comment and I'll be happy to answer. All right, my friends, thanks for staying all the way to the end of the video. I appreciate your time. My name's Matt. This is Ultra's Vanish Carbon. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.